Marlon Brando's hands were shaking when he hung up the phone. It was just past 3 in the afternoon on September 30th, 1955. James Dean had just called, panic and helplessness in his voice. "Marlon, I'm your shadow. Every role, every move, they're all copies of you. I'm a fake Brando, and I can't take it anymore." Brando had said something to him, something he thought was comforting. But when Dean hung up and got into his Porsche, those words weren't enough to save him. 3 hours later, at that intersection in Cholame, James Dean died. And Brando never told anyone about that conversation for 40 years. Because what he said on the phone, that cruel, honest, devastating truth, was perhaps the final thing that drove Dean down that road. Hollywood thought it had lost an actor, but Brando began to carry a secret. What if there was a desire for suicide behind that crash? What if Dean's death wasn't just an unfortunate accident, but an inevitable end? Brando didn't know this yet, but that phone call would haunt him for 40 years. When the phone rang, Brando felt the danger that morning. Brando was anxious. He didn't know why, but he felt uneasy. He was alone in his Laurel Canyon home, drinking his coffee, watching the foggy view of Los Angeles from the window. It was past 3 o'clock when the phone rang. When Brando answered, Dean's voice was so broken he almost didn't recognize it. "Marlon, it's Jimmy." Brando paused. When had he last spoken to Dean? Months ago, maybe a year ago, and that conversation hadn't ended well. "What do you want, Jimmy?" said Brando, a harshness impossible to hide in his voice. Dean's breathing quickened as if he were about to cry. "I need to talk. I'm going to the race today, but my head is spinning. You need to tell me something." Brando lit his cigarette. He didn't know where this conversation would lead, but he didn't feel good about it. "Jimmy, I'm not your guide. With you—" Dean interrupted, his voice rising. "Please, Marlon, just 5 minutes. Then I'll leave. I won't call again. But right now, at this minute, I need to talk to you." Brando sat silently and waited. Dean found the words rotting inside him. "Marlon, I can't do what you do. I'm just a copy. In East of Eden, in Rebel, in all of them. The critics say, the new Brando. But I don't want to be the new Brando. I want to be James Dean. But I don't know how. Because everything is you. My movements are your movements. My voice is your voice. I'm a fake you." And something inside Brando exploded. Because these words revealed a truth he had suppressed for years. Brando had first seen Dean at the Actors Studio in 1952. At the time, Dean was an unknown actor. Small roles, TV commercials, Broadway bit parts. But every time he came to the studio, he watched Brando. Not just watched, but studied. Dean noted Brando's every move, copied his every stance, even wore the same clothes. Leather jacket, white t-shirt, jeans. Brando didn't notice at first. Then the other actors started joking. "Look, little Marlon's here." Brando became uncomfortable. One day, he caught Dean in the studio hallway, grabbed his arm, and pinned him against the wall. "You have a problem with me," Brando said, his voice low but threatening. Dean froze. "What do you mean?" Brando looked at him with that famous gaze, eyelids slightly lowered, as if reading the other man's soul. "You're copying me. My walk, my voice, my mannerisms. But that doesn't make you an actor, Jimmy. It makes you a parrot. And parrots don't have their own voices." Dean's face turned bright red. Brando withdrew his hand and walked away. Dean stood there, unable to breathe. He left the studio early that day, went home, looked in the mirror, and hated himself. Because Brando was right. Dean was a parrot. He wasn't original, He was fake, and that truth was eating him up inside. But then came East of Eden, then Rebel Without a Cause, and Dean became a star overnight. Everyone was talking about him, the new Brando, Brando's youth, Brando's heir. Dean heard the praise, but felt empty inside. Because the praise wasn't for him, it was because he resembled Brando, and that was killing him. And now, on the phone, Dean was throwing all this truth in Brando's face. Brando took a deep drag on his cigarette. He could hear the desperation in Dean's voice. This wasn't just an actor's crisis. It was an existential collapse. But what could Brando say? Would he lie to Dean? Would he say, "No, Jimmy, you're great. You're original"? Impossible, because this was the truth. Dean was a copy. A good copy, sometimes even more impressive than the original, but still a copy. Brando began to speak, his voice cold, distant. "Jimmy, listen to me. You are not my responsibility. I cannot teach you how to live. You will find your own way, or you will find no way at all. But know this, every actor starts somewhere. I copied others. I read Stanislavski. I learned from Kazan. I watched the masters of the stage. Then I found my own pain. I found my own voice. You will too." Dean interrupted, his voice cracking. "But how will I find it, Marlon? I'm only 24. I haven't lived yet. I haven't lived the pain you've lived. Brando cut him off, his voice hardening. "Then live, Jimmy. Go out there, live, fall, break, lose. But don't come crying to me, because I can't feel sorry for you. You choose to stay in my shadow. That's your choice. And choices have consequences." Dean fell silent. Brando continued, and now his words were like knives. "I'll tell you one more thing, Jimmy. If you keep being just a copy of me, history will forget you. Because history remembers originals, not copies. What do you want to be? A copy that history forgets, or an original that leaves its own mark?" There was silence on the phone. Brando could hear Dean's breathing, short, quick, panicked. Then Dean spoke, his voice reduced to a whisper. "Okay, Marlon. I understand. You're right. You're always right." And he hung up. Brando held the phone in his hand, feeling strange. Had he been too harsh? But he had told the truth, and the truth sometimes hurts. Brando put the phone down, stubbed out his cigarette, and tried to forget. But he couldn't forget. Because that last tone in Dean's voice, that defeat, that surrender, told him something. Brando didn't know it yet, but that phone call was one of James Dean's last words. When Dean hung up the phone, he no longer had the instinct to survive. Dean stood in front of his house, the Porsche 550 Spider gleaming in the sun. Silver, dangerous, fast. His mechanic, Rolf Wötherich, was waiting. They had to go to the race, but Dean just stood there, repeating the words from the phone in his head. "History will forget you. You're a copy. This is your choice." Dean raised his head, looked at the sky, and he made a decision. He didn't know exactly what decision, but something had changed. A surrender, a resignation, a feeling of, "I don't care anymore." He got in the car. Rolf got in beside him. "Are you ready, Jimmy?" Rolf asked. Dean didn't answer. He just started the engine, and they set off. The road was long. The sun was beginning to set. Dean was silent, his head filled with Brando's words. Rolf was saying something, but Dean wasn't listening. All he could think was, "If I'm just a copy, then am I worth existing? If history will forget me, what's the point of me being here now?" An existential crisis at 24 behind the wheel of a silver Porsche. Dean sped up. Speed promised him something. Perhaps freedom, perhaps oblivion, perhaps just an end. Rolf warned, "Jimmy, slow down, we're going too fast." But Dean didn't hear him, or didn't want to hear him. At 5:45 p.m., at the intersection of Highway 46 and Highway 41, a Ford sedan was coming from the opposite direction. The driver, Donald Turnipseed, 23 years old, a college student. He approached the intersection, turned left, didn't see Dean's car, or saw it too late. Dean hit the brakes, but it was useless. It was the moment of impact. The sound was horrific. Metal, glass, bone. The Porsche was destroyed. Dean was thrown, his neck broken, his head crushed. Death was instant, perhaps painless, but certain. It was 5:47 p.m., exactly 3 hours and 12 minutes after Brando's phone call. James Dean, Hollywood's rising star, the new Brando, died at that intersection. And Brando froze when he heard the news. At 8 o'clock in the evening, Brando's assistant knocked on the door. His face was pale. "Marlon, there's news. James Dean. He had an accident. He's dead." Brando froze. "What?" The assistant repeated. "James Dean is dead. Car accident. 3 hours ago." Brando sat down on the floor. His head was spinning. 3 hours ago. 3 hours ago he had spoken to Dean on the phone. Those words, those cruel, sharp words. "History will forget you. You're a copy." And now Dean was dead. Brando brought his hands to his face, but he didn't cry, because the shock was too great. A thought struck him. What if Dean hadn't wanted the accident, but it had become inevitable? What if those words on the phone had extinguished the last glimmer of hope inside Dean? What if Brando had told him, "You are valuable, you are unique, you are enough"? Maybe Dean wouldn't have gotten into that Porsche. Maybe he wouldn't have sped. Maybe he would have lived. But maybes didn't turn back time. Dean was dead. And Brando was the last person to speak to him. Brando couldn't sleep that night. He sat up until morning, drinking, smoking, replaying that phone call over and over in his head. Every word, every tone, and a voice whispered in his head, "You killed him, Marlon. The words killed him." Brando tried to silence that voice, but he couldn't, because maybe it was true. Maybe he really had killed him. And for 40 years, Brando didn't speak from 1955 to 1995. Marlon Brando said nothing about James Dean. The press asked, biographers investigated, Dean fans demanded answers, but Brando kept his lips sealed. "I didn't know him," he would say. "I only saw him a few times in the studio." A lie, a complete lie, because Brando knew Dean very well. He never forgot that phone call. He saw Dean in his nightmares, that young face, that broken voice, the words, "I'm a fake you." And Brando would wake up sweating. Guilt ate him up inside. He drank, he gained weight, he became obese. His son Christian battled addiction, then committed murder and went to prison. His daughter Cheyenne fell into depression, then committed suicide. And with every tragedy, Brando remembered James Dean. Because maybe they were all the same, lost souls, people who weren't loved enough, victims of the wrong words. In 1995, on Larry King Live, Brando was 71 years old, tired, sick, old. King asked, "Is there a moment in your career you regret?" Brando paused. His eyes filled. "Yes," he said, his voice trembling. "James Dean." King was surprised. "James Dean? Why?" Brando took a deep breath, and the 40-year silence broke. "Jimmy called me, 3 hours before he died. He said something to me, and I gave him an answer, the wrong answer." The studio froze. King waited. "What did you say, Marlon?" Brando couldn't hold back his tears. "I told him he would never be original. History would forget him. He was just a copy, and His voice broke. He couldn't finish the sentence, because now, 40 years later, he understood. The words hadn't killed Dean, but perhaps they had prevented him from living. James Dean is still an icon today. 3 films, but an eternal impact. Because he died at 24, he never aged, never failed. He remained forever young. And ironically, Brando's fear did not come true. History did not forget Dean. It immortalized him. But Brando lived to be 80 and remembered that phone call every day. When he died in 2004, Dean's name was among his last words. "Tell Jimmy, I'm sorry." But Jimmy was long gone, and the apology was 49 years too late.